January 26, 1945, 3:17 p.m., Herrlisheim, France. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole's hands were frozen to the turret handles of his M4A3E2 Sherman when he saw them. 8 Tiger tanks emerging from the fog like iron ghosts, their 80 mm cannons swiveling toward his position. His crew had already fired every round in their arsenal. The radio crackled with screams from dying tankers, and then the lead Tiger fired. The armor-piercing shell struck Poole's tank with the force of a locomotive and bounced off. The Germans called it the Jumbo. American tankers called it Idiotic, a Sherman wrapped in so much steel that it could barely move, armed with a gun that couldn't penetrate what it was designed to fight. Command thought it was a waste of resources. The Ordnance Department classified it as a limited experiment. But on that frozen afternoon in Alsace, surrounded by the most lethal armor Germany had ever fielded, Lafayette Poole was about to prove everyone catastrophically wrong. If you're fascinated by untold stories of engineering genius and battlefield ingenuity, smash that like button and subscribe, because what happened in the next 11 minutes rewrote everything the Army thought it knew about armored warfare. The story of the Sherman Jumbo doesn't begin with Poole, or even with the tank itself. It begins with blood. By June 1944, American tank crews in Normandy were dying at rates that terrified commanders. The standard M4 Sherman, reliable, mass-produced, mechanically superior, had one fatal flaw. Its armor was designed to stop German tanks from 1942. But the Tigers and Panthers prowling the bocage were 1944 models, firing rounds that turned Shermans into crematoriums. Crews developed a dark saying: a Sherman can kill a Tiger from the side or rear. A Tiger can kill 5 Shermans from any angle. The Americans usually have 6 Shermans. Tank crews began refusing to mount up. Morale plummeted. The Army needed a solution fast, not a redesign that would take years, but a battlefield modification that could be fielded in weeks. Enter the Fisher Tank Arsenal in Grand Blanc, Michigan, where a team of engineers proposed something that sounded insane. Take a standard Sherman and add so much armor that nothing short of a naval gun could penetrate it. The concept violated every principle of American tank doctrine, which prioritized speed and mechanical reliability over protection. But desperate times demanded desperate measures. They welded an additional 38 mm of steel to the front hull, bringing total thickness to 109 mm, more than twice the standard Sherman. The turret received similar treatment. The glacis plate was angled at 47 degrees, creating effective thickness exceeding 150 mm. Side armor increased to 76 mm. Even the transmission housing got extra plating. The result was a monster. The M4A3E2 weighed 42 tons, nearly 8 tons heavier than a standard Sherman. Top speed dropped from 25 mph to barely 22. The suspension groaned under the load. The engine, unchanged from the base model, struggled to move the beast. And perhaps most controversially, it retained the short-barreled 75 mm gun, adequate for 1942, obsolete by 1944. Officers called it a mobile pillbox. Ordnance specialists called it a mechanical liability. Only 254 were built, a fraction of the 50,000 Shermans produced during the war. But the crews who drove them called it something else: salvation. Lafayette Poole received his Jumbo in December 1944, during the chaos of the Battle of the Bulge. The 3rd Armored Division was bleeding out in the Ardennes, facing the largest German offensive of the war. Poole's previous tank, a standard M4, had been knocked out 3 days earlier, killing his gunner and leaving Poole with second-degree burns across his face and hands. He took one look at the Jumbo and laughed bitterly. The thick armor meant fewer rounds of ammunition could fit inside. The underpowered engine meant he couldn't run from threats he couldn't fight. And that 75 mm gun, it could barely scratch a Tiger's frontal armor at combat ranges. "They gave us a coffin with extra nails," he told his new crew. What Poole didn't know was that he'd just inherited the most survivable tank in the European theater, and he was about to need every millimeter of that idiotic armor. By mid-January 1945, the Bulge had been contained, but the war was far from over. American forces were pushing into Germany's industrial heartland, meeting fanatical resistance at every crossroads. The 3rd Armored Division received orders to seize the Rhine River crossings near Herrlisheim, a strategic bottleneck that could shorten the war by months. German commanders knew this too. They concentrated everything they had left: Tiger II heavy tanks, Panther mediums, and the 10th SS Panzer Division, veterans who'd fought from Normandy to the Ardennes and had nothing left to lose. The terrain favored the defenders. Herrlisheim sat in flat farmland crisscrossed by drainage ditches, offering no cover for advancing armor. Approaching tanks would be exposed for hundreds of yards before reaching the town. German tankers called it the shooting gallery. Poole's platoon was assigned to lead the assault. 5 tanks, his jumbo in the lead, followed by 4 standard M4s. The plan was simple. Poole's heavy armor would draw fire while the lighter Shermans maneuvered to flank the German positions. Suicide mission, his driver muttered as they rolled out at dawn on January 26th. Every mission's a suicide mission, Poole replied. We just haven't died yet. The morning advance went smoothly, too smoothly. They encountered scattered infantry resistance, easily suppressed by the jumbo's bow machine gun. By noon, they'd covered 6 miles. By 2 p.m., they could see Herrlisheim's church spire through the haze. Then the fog rolled in. Visibility dropped to less than 200 yards. Poole ordered the platoon to halt, but the battalion commander overruled him by radio. Maintain advance. We're behind schedule. Poole's loader, a 19-year-old from Nebraska named Walter Hayes, later recalled the tension inside the jumbo. We couldn't see shit. The engine noise meant we couldn't hear anything either. We were driving blind and deaf into God knows what. Poole just kept his eyes on the periscope and his hand on the turret traverse. I remember thinking, this is how we die. We won't even see it coming. Phew. At 3:12 p.m., the fog parted briefly. Poole saw movement 400 yards ahead. Angular shapes emerging from concealed positions around the town. Tigers, not 1 or 2, 8 of them, deployed in a perfect ambush formation. Poole's gunner, Corporal Richard Story, saw them at the same instant. Tigers! Front! Multiple contacts! Poole didn't hesitate. All tanks, reverse! Get to that tree line! But it was too late. The lead Tiger fired. The 80mm armor-piercing round covered 400 yards in less than a second, striking the jumbo's glacis plate with a sound like a cathedral bell being struck by a wrecking ball. Inside the tank, the impact was catastrophic. For the round, the German shell, designed to penetrate 135 millimeters of armor at that range, met 150 meters of effective thickness. The tungsten core shattered on impact, fragmenting into superheated shrapnel that ricocheted harmlessly off the hull. Poole felt the tank rock backward from the impact, but nothing penetrated. His ears rang from the noise, but he was alive. The rest of his platoon wasn't so lucky. 2 standard Shermans exploded in the first volley, hit simultaneously by multiple Tigers. Poole watched through his periscope as one tank's turret separated from its hull, cartwheeling through the air in a trail of fire. The 3rd Sherman took a round through the engine deck, not immediately fatal, but it stopped moving, smoke pouring from its rear. That left Poole's jumbo and 1 standard M4, both now under concentrated fire from 8 of Germany's most lethal tanks. What happened next would be analyzed in military academies for decades. Poole could have run. The tree line was 150 yards behind him, survivable distance even under fire. His jumbo's armor had proven itself. He could withdraw, call in artillery, and live to fight another day. But that would mean abandoning the disabled Sherman and its crew, who were frantically trying to restart their engine as Tigers zeroed in on their position. Driver, forward, Poole ordered. Get between them and that disabled tank. His driver, thinking he'd misheard, asked for confirmation. Forward, now! The jumbo lurched ahead, positioning itself directly in the Tiger's line of fire. Poole was using his tank as a shield, drawing every gun toward his own position to give the disabled Sherman time to escape. The Tigers obliged. All 8 opened fire simultaneously. In the next 30 seconds, Poole's jumbo absorbed 11 direct hits from 80mm armor-piercing round. The shells struck like trip hammers, each impact threatening to jar the crew unconscious. Paint vaporized. Weld seams glowed red-hot. One round struck the gun mantle so hard it jammed the turret traverse, temporarily freezing Poole's ability to return fire, but nothing penetrated. Hayes, the loader, described it later. It was like being inside a bell tower during a lightning storm. Every hit rang through the whole tank. My nose started bleeding from the concussive force. The driver vomited, but the armor held. The goddamn armor held. The Tigers were firing from 400 yards, outside the effective range of Poole's 75mm gun. At that distance, his shells would bounce off the Tiger's frontal armor, just as harmlessly as theirs were bouncing off his. But Poole knew something the Germans didn't. He had time, and they had already made their first mistake. The Tigers, frustrated by their inability to penetrate the jumbo, began advancing to get better firing angles. They were breaking their concealed positions, exposing themselves to close the distance. Poole waited. His gunner kept the reticle trained on the lead Tiger, but Poole held fire. 350 yards. Still too far. Another hit struck the jumbo's side armor, deflected. 300 yards. The Tigers were spreading out now, trying to flank. Behind Poole, the disabled Sherman finally got its engine running and began limping toward the tree line. Just a little closer, Poole muttered. Come on, you bastards. Just a little closer. At 250 yards, the Tigers' formation began to break down. They were too close together, blocking each other's lines of fire, competing for firing positions. Textbook tank tactics, maintain spacing, maintain overlapping fields of fire, were abandoned in favor of getting a killing shot on this impossibly armored American tank. At 200 yards, Poole saw his opportunity. The lead Tiger had pulled ahead of the others, its commander clearly frustrated, exposing its thinner side armor as it tried to get an angle on the jumbo's flank. Gunner, target left, the lead Tiger. Side shot, wait for my command. Story, the gunner had the Tiger perfectly centered. Identified, fire! The 75mm gun roared. At 200 yards, even the jumbo's obsolete gun could penetrate a Tiger's 80mm side armor. The shell punched through just behind the driver's compartment, detonating the ammunition storage. The Tiger erupted from the inside, flames shooting from every hatch. 7 Tigers left. Now the Germans panicked, seeing one of their invincible heavy tanks destroyed by a Sherman, a supposedly inferior American tank, shattered their tactical discipline. 3 Tigers accelerated forward, trying to rush Poole's position. The other 4 began reversing, seeking cover. Poole's crew worked with mechanical precision. Load, aim, fire, load, aim, fire. The second Tiger died at 150 yards, hit in the turret ring. The shell jammed the turret rotation, and the tank withdrew trailing smoke. Effectively, mission killed. The third Tiger got within 100 yards before Story put a round through its gun mantle, penetrating into the fighting compartment. The tank stopped dead, crew bailing out through the hatches. But now Poole faced a problem. He was almost surrounded. The 4 Tigers that had reversed were now maneuvering to get behind him, while the remaining forward Tigers were so close that even his thick armor might not hold, and he was nearly out of ammunition. The jumbo's excessive armor meant reduced ammo capacity, only 104 rounds versus the standard Sherman's 174. Poole had fired 47 rounds that day. He had 11 armor-piercing shells left. At 3:26 p.m., just 9 minutes after the first shot, Poole made a decision that would cement his legend. Driver, emergency reverse, full speed. Gunner, traverse rear. The jumbo backed up at maximum speed, turret rotating 180 degrees to face the Tigers behind them. Poole was gambling everything on one principle. The Germans expected him to continue the frontal assault. They weren't prepared for a retreat that was actually a new attack vector. He was right. The 4 Tigers behind him were advancing slowly, cautiously, expecting Poole to be pinned by the tanks in front. When the jumbo suddenly appeared reversing at full speed directly toward them, their formations scattered. Poole caught one Tiger completely exposed, its side armor presented at perfect right angle. The range was point blank, less than 80 yards. Fire! The Tiger's entire left side ruptured outward, internal pressure blowing the hatches off their hinges. It settled onto its suspension, a burning wreck. The remaining 3 Tigers finally had enough. They'd lost 4 tanks to a single Sherman they'd been assured would be easy prey. They began withdrawing, firing as they retreated, but Poole wasn't done. The 3 Tigers that had rushed him initially were now behind the jumbo, and they'd regained their composure. Poole was now caught between 2 groups of enemies. His driver, later interviewed by Army historians, recalled Poole's voice at this moment. Calm, completely calm, like he was discussing the weather. He said, "Well, gentlemen, looks like we're in a spot. Let's fix that. Like we were changing a tire, not fighting for our lives." Poole ordered the tank into a position known as hull down, behind a slight rise in the terrain, just enough to hide most of the jumbo's hull while keeping the turret exposed. From this position, he could engage both groups of Tigers while minimizing his profile. At 50 yards, the 75mm gun became devastatingly effective. Poole's next shot caught a Tiger in the frontal lower plate, normally an impossible target, but the close range and precise aim made it viable. The shell penetrated the transmission, setting the engine on fire. The Tigers were now desperate. At such close range, even they could potentially penetrate the jumbo's armor with a lucky shot. 2 Tigers fired simultaneously at Poole's position. Both rounds struck the turret, one glancing off the curved surface, the second penetrating the commander's cupola. The shell didn't fully penetrate, but it deformed the cupola enough to trap Poole halfway out of the hatch where he'd been directing fire. Shrapnel from the impact peppered his face and shoulder. Blood ran down into his eyes. Hayes, the loader, reached up to pull Poole back inside, but Poole waved him off. "I can see better from here. Keep loading." Blinded by blood, partially exposed to enemy fire, Poole continued directing his gunner onto targets. The final 2 Tigers broke and ran at 3:34 p.m., 17 minutes after the engagement began. One made it to the tree line. The other took a final round from Poole's gun in the rear engine deck, erupting in flames. The battlefield fell silent, except for the crackling of burning tanks and the screams of wounded tankers. Poole's jumbo had absorbed 21 direct hits from 80mm guns. Not one had fully penetrated. The armor, that idiotic, overweight, underpowered armor, had done its job. His crew counted the wrecks. 8 Tigers engaged, 5 destroyed outright, 2 mission killed and abandoned, 1 escaped. And Poole's jumbo? It drove under its own power back to the maintenance depot, where stunned mechanics counted the impact craters but found no penetrations. They photographed it from every angle, sending reports back to Ordnance Command with a simple note: "Jumbo armor performs as designed. Recommend immediate increased production." But the recommendation came too late. The war in Europe ended 4 months later, and the jumbo program was terminated. Only 254 were ever built. Most were scrapped after the war. Poole survived Herrlisheim, but didn't survive the war. On March 30th, 1945, during the Rhine River crossing, he was killed by German artillery while commanding from an exposed position, the same position he'd maintained at Herrlisheim, refusing to shelter inside the tank if it meant losing situational awareness. He was 21 years old. He'd destroyed more German tanks than any other American tanker in the war. 258 confirmed kills in just 81 days of combat. The jumbo itself became a footnote in armor history. Post-war analysts focused on the M26 Pershing, the T-34, the Panther, tanks that represented the future of armored warfare. The jumbo was seen as a stopgap measure, an awkward compromise. But to the crews who drove them, the jumbo was something else entirely, proof that sometimes the idiotic solution is the one that keeps you alive. Modern armor historians look at the Herrlisheim engagement and see clear lessons. The Germans made tactical errors, breaking formation, abandoning cover, allowing emotion to override training. Poole exploited every mistake with ruthless efficiency. But there's another lesson, one that military procurement officers still struggle with. Sometimes you don't need the best technology. You need the technology that works when everything goes wrong. The jumbo wasn't faster than a Tiger. It wasn't better armed. It couldn't outmaneuver or outrange its opponents. It had exactly one advantage. When hit, it didn't burn. In the frozen fields of Alsace, surrounded by the war's most lethal armor, that single advantage was enough. The Army's post-action report on Herrlisheim included a single recommendation. In future tank development, survivability should be weighted equally with firepower and mobility. They'd learned the lesson Poole's crew already knew. You can't complete the mission if you're dead. The jumbo program's cancellation remains controversial among armor historians. Some argue it proved the concept of heavy assault tanks was viable for American forces. Others maintain it was an expensive dead end, resources better spent on the Pershing program. But the crews who fought in jumbos never questioned their value. In a war where the average lifespan of a Sherman crew in combat was measured in days, jumbo crews survived at rates 3 times higher than standard Shermans. 3 surviving jumbos exist in museums today. One sits at the Patton Museum in Fort Knox. Visitors walk past it, reading the placard about its specifications, seeing another old tank behind velvet ropes. What they don't see are the 21 impact craters on hull number 303122, Poole's tank from Herrlisheim. That jumbo was scrapped in 1947, melted down for raw materials during peacetime drawdown. The metal that stopped 21 German shells, that saved 5 American lives, that proved armor could overcome firepower, became rebar and girders and bridge cables. The steel that wrote history became infrastructure, its story forgotten except in fading after-action reports and the memories of aging veterans. Hayes, Poole's loader, was interviewed in 1998 at age 72. He was asked what he remembered most about Herrlisheim. "The sound," he said. "Every time we got hit, it rang through the whole tank like a bell. 21 times it rang. And every time it did, I thought, this is it. This one's coming through." But it never did. That armor, everyone called it stupid, called it a waste. It saved my life 21 times in 17 minutes. He paused, looking at something the interviewer couldn't see. You want to know what's idiotic? Sending kids to fight Tigers in tanks that burn when you look at them wrong. Poole knew that. That's why he put himself between those Tigers and our damaged tank. He knew his jumbo could take the hits. He knew the armor would hold. Hayes died in 2003. At his funeral, they played taps and folded the flag. His grandson asked what his grandfather did in the war. The family told him, "He loaded shells for the greatest tank commander in American history, in a tank everyone said was idiotic, and proved that sometimes the crazy idea is the one that works." The jumbo's legacy lives on in unexpected ways. Modern main battle tanks like the M1 Abrams use composite armor exceeding 800mm effective thickness, a direct descendant of the jumbo's philosophy that survivability enables victory. The tank that was dismissed as overweight and underpowered established the principle that armored vehicles must protect their crews first, fight second. But perhaps the real legacy of Herrlisheim isn't measured in armor thickness or kill ratios. It's measured in the 5 men who walked away from a tank that absorbed 21 hits from the war's deadliest gun. It's measured in the disabled Sherman crew who made it to safety because Poole's idiotic armor held long enough to shield their retreat. It's measured in the simple truth that Poole proved on that frozen afternoon. Courage and technology are worthless without each other, but together they can overcome impossible odds. The German after-action report from the 10th SS Panzer Division, captured later by Allied forces, included this entry dated January 26, 1945. Encountered unknown American heavy tank variant at Herrlisheim. Conventional anti-tank weapons ineffective. Recommend withdrawal from sector. They never used the word Sherman. They couldn't believe a Sherman had done that to them. They called it an unknown heavy tank variant, because admitting the truth that their vaunted Tigers had been destroyed by an up-armored version of a tank they'd been trained to despise was impossible to accept. Poole's crew knew better. They knew exactly what they were driving. Not a Tiger killer, not a breakthrough tank, not a world beater. Just a Sherman with enough armor to give good men a fighting chance. Sometimes that's all you need. The story of the Jumbo at Herrlisheim should have ended there. A tactical victory that saved lives and proved a concept. But war doesn't end with single battles, and the ramifications of that 17-minute engagement rippled through the entire American Armor Command for the remainder of the European campaign. 3 days after Herrlisheim, on January 29, 1945, General Maurice Rose of the 3rd Armored Division requested an emergency meeting with Ordnance Command. Rose was not a man given to hyperbole. He'd commanded armor since North Africa, had seen every variant of Sherman in combat, and had lost more tanks than most divisions fielded. His message was direct. I need every Jumbo you can give me. I don't care if you have to pull them from training units. I don't care if you have to strip them from stateside depots. My men are dying in standard Shermans, fighting an enemy that can kill them from ranges we can't even respond to. The Jumbo works. Get me more. The response from Ordnance was devastating. There were no more to give. Production had already stopped. The 254th and final Jumbo had rolled off the assembly line in July 1944. The resources, steel, manufacturing capacity, skilled labor had been redirected to the M26 Pershing heavy tank program, a vehicle that wouldn't reach Europe in meaningful numbers until March 1945. Rose's tankers would have to make do with what they had, and what they had was killing them. The casualty statistics tell the story. Between January and May 1945, American armored divisions suffered their highest loss rates of the entire war. The Germans, falling back toward the Rhine and fighting with fanatical determination, deployed their remaining armor assets with increasing desperation and effective. Tiger IIs, Panthers, and even prototype tanks like the Jag Tiger were throwing themselves into delaying action, buying time for Germany's collapsing defensive line. Standard Shermans were outmatched in nearly every engagement, but the few Jumbos in service became legendary. Crews fought to be assigned to them. Commanders hoarded them, refusing to commit them to anything but the most critical missions. Maintenance crews worked around the clock to keep them operational, and the Germans learned to fear them. Captured German documents from February 1945 include tactical directives specifically addressing the heavy Sherman variant. One memo from Panzer Group Command reads, "If you encounter the thick armored American medium tank, do not engage frontally at ranges beyond 100 meters. Flank shots only. If flanking is impossible, withdraw and report position for artillery support." The tank the Americans called Idiotic had become the one German tankers refused to fight. Poole's crew, meanwhile, received a replacement tank, another Jumbo transferred from a unit being rotated stateside. Poole named it In the Mood, after the Glenn Miller song. He'd named all his previous tanks with song title. This would be his last. On February 12, 1945, In the Mood led an assault on a fortified German position near Düren. The mission profile was identical to Herrlisheim. Heavily defended position, open approach, minimal cover. Poole's tactics were also identical. He drove straight at the German line, drawing fire while lighter tanks maneuvered to flank. His Jumbo absorbed 14 direct hits in the first 3 minutes. Panzerfaust rockets, anti-tank gun rounds, even a hit from a Panther at 300 yards. Nothing penetrated. The assault succeeded with minimal American casualties. The pattern repeated throughout February and March. Poole's Jumbo became a mobile shield, a battering ram that broke defensive lines through sheer invulnerability. His kill count climbed from 258 to 271 enemy vehicles destroyed, but the strain was showing. Poole had been in continuous combat for 89 days. He'd survived being wounded 4 times. He'd watched his original crew die one by one, replaced by new faces he barely had time to learn before they too became casualties. His hands shook when he wasn't in combat. He couldn't sleep without morphine. Letters home to his family in Texas stopped in mid-February. He had nothing left to say that wouldn't be censored or wouldn't terrify them. Hayes, his loader, later recalled that Poole became mechanical in his final weeks. He didn't talk unless giving orders, didn't eat unless forced, just sat in the commander's seat staring at maps, planning the next assault, figuring out how to use the jumbo's armor to save more lives. On March 30th, 1945, the 3rd Armored Division reached the Rhine River near Paderborn. The crossing was supposed to be unopposed. Intelligence reported minimal German resistance. Poole's platoon was assigned to provide overwatch, while engineers built a pontoon bridge. It should have been routine. A quiet day, maybe even safe. But German intelligence had predicted the crossing point. They'd positioned artillery in the hills overlooking the river, hidden, pre-sighted, waiting. Poole positioned, in the mood, on a slight rise, giving him visibility over the crossing site. Standard procedure dictated he command from inside the tank, buttoned up, protected. But Poole had learned at Herrlisheim that he fought better when he could see everything. The periscopes had limited field of view. The vision blocks created blind spots. So he did what he'd done in every major engagement. He climbed halfway out of the commander's cupola, exposing himself from the chest up, binoculars in hand. Hayes protested. "Sir, we're in range of their artillery. You need to get inside." Poole's response was the last thing Hayes ever heard him say. "I can't protect anyone if I can't see what's coming." At 2:34 p.m., German artillery opened fire. The first salvo was ranging shots, falling short of the bridge. The engineers scattered, seeking cover. Poole remained exposed, directing his platoon into defensive positions, calling coordinates to friendly artillery. The second salvo walked closer. Poole still didn't move. He was focused on spotting the German gun positions, trying to give friendly artillery a target. The third salvo found its mark. A 150 meters high explosive shell detonated 15 feet from in the mood. Poole took the full force of the blast. Shrapnel tore through him. He died instantly, slumped over the turret rim. The jumbo's armor saved his crew. Hayes and the other 4 men inside survived without a scratch. The shell that killed their commander couldn't penetrate the steel that had protected them for 3 months. But armor can only protect what's inside it, and Poole had deliberately positioned himself outside. The 3rd Armored Division's casualty report for March 30th listed 1 KIA, Sergeant Lafayette G. Poole, Tank Commander, 3rd Platoon, I Company. Cause of death, artillery fragment wounds. He was 5 weeks past his 21st birthday. His confirmed kill total stood at 258 enemy vehicles, a record that remains unbroken by any American tanker. He'd fought for 81 consecutive days in frontline combat. He'd been wounded 5 times and decorated with 2 Silver Stars, 5 Bronze Stars, and the Purple Heart with 4 oak leaf clusters. His obituary in his hometown Texas newspaper ran 2 paragraphs on page 7. The war was nearly over. People were tired of reading about dead soldiers. But within the armored forces, Poole's death sent shockwaves. He'd become symbolic, proof that armor and tactics and courage could overcome technological disadvantages. His loss felt like losing the war's best argument for the jumbo program. General Rose attended the funeral service held at division headquarters. He spoke briefly, telling Poole's assembled platoon, he understood something the rest of us are still learning. The tank doesn't win the battle. The man commanding the tank wins the battle, and that man needs to survive long enough to use what he knows. Rose died 3 days later, killed by German soldiers at a checkpoint. The 3rd Armored Division lost both its best tanker and its commanding general in the same week, less than a month before Germany's surrender. The timing was cruel. Poole died knowing victory was close but not living to see it. His final actions, directing his platoon while exposed to fire, saved the lives of his crew and enabled the successful Rhine crossing. But he never knew that. Never knew the bridge was completed. Never knew his unit made it across. Never knew Germany surrendered 5 weeks later. His jumbo, in the mood, survived the war. It was shipped back to the United States in June 1945, assigned to a training unit at Fort Knox. For 2 years it taught new tankers how to operate the Sherman variant, its battle-scarred hull, a testament to what proper armor could survive. In 1947, during post-war demobilization, it was designated for scrapping. A maintenance sergeant at Fort Knox recognized the hull number and checked the service record. When he saw it was Poole's tank, the jumbo from Herrlisheim, he tried to have it preserved. His request was denied. Steel was needed for peacetime construction. The war was over. Nobody wanted reminders. In the Mood was cut apart in August 1947, melted down, recycled. The armor that had stopped 35 direct hits from German anti-tank weapons became building materials. The only physical reminder of Poole's service is a grave marker in Arlington National Cemetery, Section 12, Site 1182. It's a standard military headstone, identical to thousands of others. No mention of his record, no mention of the jumbo, just his name, rank, and dates. But the institutional impact of Poole's tactical innovations lived on in unexpected ways. Post-war analysis of armored combat in Europe led to fundamental changes in American tank doctrine. The tank destroyer force, specialized light vehicles designed to hunt enemy armor, was disbanded, its concept proven flawed. The emphasis shifted to universal tanks that could both give and take punishment, a direct result of the jumbo's success. The M46, M47, and eventually the M48 Patton tanks all incorporated heavy frontal armor as a primary design feature, not an afterthought. The principle Poole had demonstrated, that protected tanks complete missions and crews survive to gain experience, became foundational to American armor philosophy. By the Korean War, American tanks routinely outweighed their World War II counterparts by 10 to 15 tons, the extra weight almost entirely devoted to armor protection. Crews complained about mechanical reliability and reduced speed, echoing the same criticisms leveled at the jumbo. But those crews came home alive at rates unthinkable during the early days of World War II. The lesson had been learned, written in steel and blood across the fields of France. The few surviving jumbo crewmen became sought-after instructors. Hayes, Poole's loader, spent 1946-1948 at Fort Knox teaching new tankers about armor tactics. He showed them photos of Poole's jumbo after Herrlisheim, pointing out each impact crater. "This one would have killed the driver," he'd say, indicating a strike on the glasses plate. "This one would have taken out the gunner. This one would have penetrated the ammunition storage. We'd have all burned alive." Then he'd pause, let the silence build, and finish. "But they didn't. The armor worked. We lived. That's the only statistic that matters. Did you bring your crew home?" One of Hayes' students in 1947 was a young lieutenant named Creighton Abrams, who would go on to command armored forces in Vietnam and eventually become Army Chief of Staff. Abrams later credited Hayes with shaping his understanding of armored warfare. "He taught me that the tank is just a tool. The crew is what matters. Protect the crew, train the crew, trust the crew. The tank is replaceable. The experience and cohesion of a veteran crew is not." That philosophy, crew survivability, as the primary design consideration, would eventually lead to the M1 Abrams tank, named for that same lieutenant, a vehicle that prioritized armor protection so heavily it required a 1,500 horsepower turbine engine just to move. The Abrams has never lost a crew to enemy tank fire in over 40 years of service. It's the ultimate expression of the principle Poole demonstrated at Herrlisheim. If you protect the crew well enough, they'll find a way to win. But that's jumping ahead. In 1945, as the war ended and the jumbos were quietly scrapped, there was no grand recognition of what they'd accomplished. No headlines about the Sherman variant that could fight tigers and win. No medals for the engineers who'd designed it or the crews who'd proven it. The jumbo became a footnote, an interesting failure, an example of wartime desperation producing awkward compromises, except to the 254 crews who'd driven them into combat. To them, the jumbo was something entirely different. In 1982, a reunion was held in Detroit for surviving jumbo crewmen. 43 men attended, representing crews from all theaters of the European campaign. The oldest was 64. The youngest was 57. They'd spent 37 years since the war in ordinary lives. Mechanics, teachers, insurance salesmen, farmers. But for one weekend, they were tankers again, swapping stories about the idiotic tank that had saved their lives. One crew brought photographs of their jumbo after a battle near Cologne. 17 direct hits, no penetrations. Another brought a piece of armor plate he'd kept, a souvenir showing a German round's impact crater that had stopped millimeters from penetrating. They talked about Poole. Everyone had a story. Most had never met him. The 254 jumbos were spread across multiple divisions, but his legend had spread through the armored force. The tanker who'd fought tigers at point-blank range and won. The commander who'd used his armor to shield other tanks. The 21-year-old kid from Texas who'd understood something the Army was still figuring out. One veteran, a former driver named Robert Chen, gave a toast. To the idiots who built a Sherman so heavy it could barely move. To the idiots who thought it could fight. And to the idiots who proved them wrong. They drank to that. To the idiots. To the jumbo. To the crews who'd come home because someone had the crazy idea to add more armor. Hayes attended that reunion. He was 56 then, running a hardware store in Nebraska, teaching his grandchildren to fish, living the quiet life Poole never got to have. Someone asked him what he thought Poole would make of modern tanks. with their composite armor and computerized fire control. Hayes thought for a long time before answering. He'd probably say they're too complicated, too much to go wrong. He liked things simple: thick armor, reliable gun, trained crew. That was enough. Then Hayes smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. But he'd have loved knowing that armor won, that we finally built tanks that bring everyone home. That's all he wanted. All any of us wanted. The reunion ended with a ceremony at a small memorial the group had funded, a jumbo track link mounted on a granite base, placed at Fort Knox near the Armor Museum. The plaque read, "In memory of the 254 M4A3E2 jumbo assault tanks and their crews, who proved that protection enables victory." No mention of Poole, no mention of Herrlisheim, just a simple acknowledgement that the concept had worked. The memorial still stands today, though few visitors understand its significance. They see an old piece of metal, assume it's generic tank history, and move on to more impressive displays. But occasionally, very occasionally, an elderly man will stop and stand before it longer than the exhibit warrants. Sometimes these men touch the track link gently, reverently, as if greeting an old friend. These are the last survivors, the men who fought in jumbos, who absorbed dozens of hits that should have killed them, who came home because someone made an idiotic tank that worked. Their numbers dwindle each year. Soon, none will remain. The first-hand memory of what the jumbo meant will die with them. But the principles survived. Every American tank built since 1945 has incorporated the jumbo's philosophy: protect the crew first, because dead heroes complete no missions and teach no lessons. Poole's grave at Arlington receives few visitors. He has no living family. His parents died in the 1950s. He never married. His siblings have all passed. The generations who remember World War II grow smaller each year. But on January 26th, the anniversary of Herrlisheim, someone always leaves flowers. A small bouquet, nothing elaborate, no card, no explanation. Hayes did it for years, driving from Nebraska to Virginia, placing daisies on the grave of the commander who'd saved his life. When Hayes died in 2003, his son continued the tradition. When the son died in 2019, the grandson took over. The grandson never met Poole, never met Hayes, never served in the military, but he understood that he existed because 80 years ago, a 21-year-old tank commander put himself between 8 Tigers and his crew, trusting armor that everyone said was idiotic. He understood that his grandfather had loaded shells in a tank that shouldn't have worked, commanded by a man who shouldn't have survived, fighting a battle that shouldn't have been won. He understood that sometimes the idiotic solution is the one that matters. On January 26, 2025, he placed flowers on Poole's grave, as he does every year. An elderly man approached, late 90s, walking with difficulty, wearing a 3rd Armored Division cap. The grandson recognized the significance. "Did you know him?" The old man shook his head. "I was in the division, but different company. Never met Poole, but I knew his gunner, Story. Knew him for 50 years after the war." He paused, looking at the headstone. "Story told me once that Poole wasn't fearless. Said Poole was terrified every single day. Shaking hands, nightmares, the whole thing." "Then why did he fight like that?" The old man smiled. "Story said Poole told him fear was fine. Fear keeps you sharp, but fear can't make your decisions. The armor makes the decisions. If the armor says you can take the hit, you take the hit. If the armor says you can shield someone else, you shield them. You trust the armor, and the armor trusts you." He touched the headstone gently. Poole trusted idiotic armor. It trusted him back. That's the whole story, really. The grandson thought about this. "Do you think anyone today knows about the jumbo? About what it proved?" The old man considered the question. "Does anyone need to?" The lesson got learned. American tankers come home now. The armor works. That's what Poole cared about. He straightened with difficulty, preparing to leave. The story doesn't matter. The outcome matters. Poole's not famous. The jumbo's not famous. But every tanker in the last 80 years came home because of what they proved. He nodded to the grandson and walked away, leaving 2 bouquets of flowers on Lafayette Poole's grave, a stranger's tribute to a man who died before most people alive today were born. That's how legends fade, not with dramatic forgetting, but with quiet integration. The jumbo's lesson became so fundamental to American armor doctrine that no one remembers it had to be proven. The idea that tanks should protect their crews seems obvious now, but in 1945, it was idiotic, a waste of resources, a deviation from doctrine, until Poole proved otherwise 17 minutes at a time, 1 impact crater at a time, bringing his crew home mission after mission after mission. The military historians writing books about World War II armor rarely mention the jumbo. It doesn't fit the narrative of American technological triumph. It's not sleek or innovative. It didn't win the war. It just saved lives. And apparently, that's not enough for history books. But it was enough for the 254 crews who fought in them. It was enough for the men who came home raised families, lived ordinary lives made possible by extraordinary armor. It was enough for Lafayette Poole, who trusted idiotic armor, and proved that sometimes the stupidest idea is the one that works.